Hello once again, everybody, and welcome to the latest virtual program from Cooperstown, New York, site of the National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum. We're very glad that you could join us for the second in our series, our virtual author series coming up. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Bruce Markison. I work in the Hall of Fame's education department, but I won't be doing most of the talking. Most of the talking will be by the man you've seen on your screen, Dwier Brown. A longtime actor. He's been acting since the 1980s and one of the key players in a great baseball film, Field of Dreams, which came out 31 years ago, back in 1989. We will talk to Dwier about his book, If You Build It, his experiences on the set of Field of Dreams, some of the actors that he has worked with. Also, we'll talk to Dwier about his appearance in the Hall of Fame film, Generations of the Game, which currently we're not able to show because of the coronavirus situation. But when our Grandstand Theater reopens, hopefully later this year at some point, that is something that folks will be able to see. And Dwier is actually featured in that. Dwier, it's a real pleasure to have you with us, joining us remotely for our program here in Cooperstown. How have you been?
I've been great, Bruce. Thanks so much for having me.
I know you were in Cooperstown just about a year ago. I didn't get a chance to meet you then, but this is a place you're pretty familiar with. Thoughts on going to the Hall of Fame?
It was just such an honor. I was just taken with how beautiful Cooperstown is, and just how kind of small and intimate the Hall of Fame feels. It was just so great. I got to, hold Ty Cobb's mitt and meet a lot of fans who happened to be there on the same day I was. And the memorabilia there is just breathtaking. I could have spent days there.
Did you have a favorite artifact or exhibit that you saw?
Oh gosh. I'm really taken with the Babe Ruth stuff and the movie, the Legends of the Game. What is that? Was just amazing. I mean, it really sets the mood for the whole baseball museum, because it's so much about how baseball has been handed down over the years. And I'm kind of a nostalgia buff anyway. So just anything, you see the shoes that they wore 100 years ago, and it's kind of takes your breath away, I think.
Who approached you about doing that bit for Generations of the Game?
I don't think anybody approached me about it, to be honest. They invited me to go watch it, but I was kind of surprised. I think those deals get made through Universal Studios and all that stuff. But I was just honored to be included with all the great. With the great ball players that grace that film. That's one of the best casts I've ever been in.
Very nice. Well, you've been doing movies and television since the 1980s. Just a few of your credits listed here. And I've promised people here at the Hall of Fame that I won't go too heavy on the genre of horror, because everybody that works with me knows that I'm a horror nut. So I'll have to keep that in balance. But you've been in a lot of great movies: Red Dragon, The Cutting Edge, the skating movie, which I thought was terrific, To Live and Die in L.A. with William Peterson, who later would go on to star in CSI, and that's one of the TV shows that he did as well. Ghost Whisperer, a show that I really enjoyed. Criminal Minds, which just wrapped up a long run on TV. But now you've decided to branch out in another area, doing the book, If You Build It. I've got to ask you, you're an accomplished actor. You've done all this great stuff over the last 3 decades or so, or more than that. What made you want to sit down and wade into the area of writing a book?
I actually, can you hang on a second? Come on. Hey, sorry. My dog was just walking through the background there and sneaking tissues out of the bathroom. We call her Grandma, so it sounds kind of weird me yelling off camera, "Hey, Grandma, spit out the tissue." But anyway, sorry, I digress. Tell me again the question.
Why did you decide to venture into an area of writing? I'm not sure if it's something you've done before at different levels.
Well, my mom was a great reader and letter writer, and so most of my writing has been in writing letters to her. And I'd always wanted to write a book, and I just decided that it was the time when the 25th anniversary of the movie was coming up. I had always hoped that Kevin would write a book, or James Earl would write a book about this wonderful movie we were all a part of. But because I wanted to read about it. But when they didn't do it, I thought, well, this is my opportunity, and it was really fun because of course, I knew a lot about the movie from being there, but I did a lot of research on it. Went through the motion picture archives and spoke to a lot of the cast members and Phil Robinson, the writer director, and so it was kind of fun for me to find out a lot of things that I didn't know about the movie and then add them to the stuff I already did. And then, of course, my experience of people coming up to me over the years, the past 32 years, and telling me how much that movie has meant to them, and both of us ending up in tears and hugging each other in airports or wherever they happen to recognize me, in grocery stores. I thought that was an experience everybody in the cast had because, the movie was so meaningful. But I realized while I was writing it that if you run into James Earl Jones or Kevin Costner somewhere, you've got dozens of movies to talk to them about that have made an impression. But with me, this is the movie that people remember. I mean, I get recognized for some other things, but overwhelmingly, this is the movie. And I think it's because, at that pivotal moment in the most emotional part of the movie, when Kevin and Ray and James Earl have opened everybody's hearts, I get to take off my catcher's mask and walk right into people's hearts. And I think it's made them remember my face in a way that I could never have expected. That 30 years later, I was in Lowe's, it's a home improvement store, the other day, and this guy asked me if he could help me, and I said, "Oh, no, thanks, I'm fine." And he says, "Hey, are you an actor?" And he immediately got teary-eyed when he found out I was, he recognized me from Field of Dreams, and it's 32 years later. I'm mystified, but I can only attribute it to the fact of how open people's hearts get by the end of that film, and there's my face, 40 feet tall. So I guess it kind of tattoos itself on their optic nerves or something for them to have get facial recognition 32 years later.
So it was all these impromptu visits, people coming up to you, mentioning or asking you if you were in the film and talking to you about it. Was that collectively what motivated you to want to sit down and write?
Yeah, I guess. Like I said, I thought this was probably happening to Kevin and James Earl, and I realized that it was sort of my unique position in the world. I waited to write a book till I had something I thought was worth writing about. I was kind of a blue collar actor, and I met a lot of stars and had a lot of incredible experiences. But it's not like hearing my name was going to sell a bunch of books. But when I realized that this experience that I'd had with this profound opening of hearts that I've had with people all over the country and in various times over 30 years, I thought, oh, this is kind of a unique thing. A lot of my actor friends who were much more successful didn't have that one role that people still think about in such a fond and emotional way. So I started writing about those, and then I couldn't help but think about my dad, and my growing up with him. And, a lot of people don't know, but he died 30 days before I went to go shoot the movie Field of Dreams. And it was sudden and unexpected. So it was very strange to leave his funeral and go to Iowa and play a father coming back from the dead to play catch with their son. You can imagine that it made the whole experience much more profound for me. And, so when those stories started coming up, and then, we just had a lot of fun shooting that movie. So I wanted to relay those stories because it's the other questions that people ask me over the years. What's Kevin Costner like, and what was it like meeting, Darth Vader, or all those things that people invariably want to know.
You mentioned the passing of your father, and I want to talk about that in depth. Obviously, it's important. I lost my mother when I was in college. I was a sophomore, so I was pretty young.
I'm sorry.
I was able to brace for it though, because we knew it was cancer that was, it was not reparable. They could not do surgery. The techniques were just not advanced back in the 80s. enough to do anything about it. So we kind of could prepare. You mentioned that in your father's case, this was sudden, was unexpected. I don't know if you want to go into any of the details, but I think it's always a little more difficult dealing with it from that standpoint. That immediate hit is just such a shock to the system.
Yeah, yeah, it's true. First of all, my condolences about your mom. That's a really hard time to lose your mom. And you know, in my experience, as much as we all try to prepare ourselves for those events, there's no way you can do it. You know, you sort of try to tell yourself, oh, these might be the last years, or gosh, what's it going to feel like if mom or dad isn't here? And we do that, I think, obviously to prepare ourselves and to try to lessen the pain. But to be honest, I don't think it works. But you know, it is human nature to do that. I was just talking with my wife about that, how we brace for things when our life's going well. We're constantly thinking, okay, what's going to happen to make this go away? And you know, it's a human thing, but I do think it's pretty awful anytime. It was difficult. My father, I was in LA and I was going to head to Iowa to shoot the movie, and decided that since I was that far across country, I'll just fly to my parents' house first and visit with them for a couple of weeks and then go to Iowa. And just a week before I was coming home, my mom said, oh, your dad's in the hospital and, you know, he's kind of sick. And, you know, I should preface this by saying that I grew up on a farm in Ohio, and everybody I knew, and mostly my parents, were very stoic sort of people. There was, you know, never any, you know, hysteria or you know, people were just, oh, your dad's sick, you know, and that's the way my mom described it. And I said, well, Mom, I'm coming home in a week, you know, and she said, oh, well, that should be fine. And anyway, it just was a nagging feeling for me. And I ended up changing my reservation and flying home, you know, immediately. And my father died that night, the night that I got home. And it's just, you know, I of course am grateful that I made that decision. But, you know, I also think that my dad was kind of hanging on to wait for my sister and I to get in from out of town. But it does kind of say something about those moments that we want to, you know, honor our intuition about things. And fortunately, my dad was still lucid for most of the day, so we got to talk about a lot of things. And you know, as he kind of slowly, I don't know what you want to say, I guess he was dying really in the course of the day. He was kind of running through his life and thinking about the regrets that he'd had. And, you know, of course I tried to tell him what a great dad he was, and, you know, honestly believed that my father was a great man and had a pretty awful dad himself. So I particularly admire those people who teach themselves how to be a great dad without an example in their own lives. But anyway, and, you know, he died that night, and we, you know, went about comforting my mom and, you know, taking care of funeral arrangements and all that kind of stuff. And then off I go to shoot this movie that, you know, we're talking about here today. And I always take, this is my dad's baseball mitt from the 30s. And I took it to the movie set with me in hopes that I could get it in the film, you know, as a little homage to my dad. But of course, I played a catcher in the movie, so I had to wear a catcher's mitt, and the props department gave me one. But I take this to all the events that I go to, and you know, it's just my way of having Dad with me. And I think it's kind of cool that people can put their hand in the mitt and come as close to shaking my father's hand as they can these days.
If you would, Dwyer, hold that mitt up so everybody can get that glove up, so everyone can get a good look at it.
Yeah.
The fingers not stitched together, so this is really vintage.
Yeah, this is. This is Johnny Moore is the name embossed on here, and I had to look him up, but he was a big star once upon a time, and you know, it's hard to believe that they played baseball with these. I mean, when I was holding Ty Cobb's mitt in the Baseball Hall of Fame, it's pretty much this. He's got a little stretch of leather here rather than the strings, but it's just striking that these guys, you know, well, even before then they were playing with bare hands, but yeah, it's amazing the evolution of the baseball mitt, you know, which is also one of the fun things to watch at the Baseball Hall of Fame.
Given the timing of your father's death, you're on the cusp of doing this movie, which at the time you didn't know if this movie was going to be successful or not, and it ends up being, a huge hit, legendary. But did you give any thought at all? Maybe I shouldn't go through with this. Maybe I'm just not in the right emotional state. Did that ever cross your mind after your father's passing?
Boy, I mean, I already had the job, and it's hard enough to get a job, let alone turn it down. But I definitely had moments. I thought, when my dad died, and I'm going to the set, I thought I'm not going to be able to make it through this scene at all. I'm just going to be a blubbering mess, And once you audition for something and they hire you, of course, they sort of want you to do what you did at the audition. They'll give you minor directions. But anyway, I was pretty concerned about it, to be honest. But surprisingly, when my dad died, I had trouble feeling sad about it. I mean, my father had a pretty rough life. His dad, as I said, essentially abandoned him. They lived through the Depression. He served in World War II. I mean, we moved to a farm, and he had a great family and all that stuff, but he had a rough going early on. And I guess my overwhelming feeling at the funeral and as soon as he died was, I sort of pictured him. It felt like there was a spirit, like a hummingbird, that was buzzing around, and he would come and say, "Oh my gosh, I just went to the moon, and it's so amazing, Dwyer," and off he'd go. And it was such a happy energy. And, I'm not somebody who's kind of airy-fairy about a lot of those things, but when I thought of my dad, it was just this joyful kind of feeling of him being free finally from the difficulties of his life. So that presented even a worse problem in a way, because I couldn't be sad about him either, which is, in some ways more appropriate for the role. And, sir, I ended up there in Iowa. I've got my dad's mitt with me, and, we're talking about the ghosts in the cornfield. And here I'm talking with these other actors that are playing with it. And I really felt my father was there with all of us shooting the movie. He was very excited about, me getting this part. And so, when I got close to shooting the scene, I was there for a few days before we actually got around to shooting it. I was worried that I wouldn't be emotional enough, that I wouldn't be able to feel sad about it. And anyway, I think it's part of that dynamic that I was feeling as an actor, at the same time as, of course, the preparation that I was doing for the character itself, and that Kevin did, and we did a lot of talking about it with Phil Robinson, the director. That kind of creates that very bittersweet sort of feeling that scene has. You want to cry, but you sort of want to smile and laugh at the same time. It's a wonderful little kind of, and it's a lot of it is in the writing, of course, but I think my kind of conflicting feelings about my father's death. Of course, I missed him very much, but I couldn't help but feel that he had really gone to a happier place. So anyway, it was an issue, and but I think it came out okay in the long run.
I would say it did. Now, parents can sometimes be our toughest critics. Do you think your father would have liked the movie?
This movie has been such a great thing in my life, and the only regret I when people ask me is I wish I'd been able to watch it with him. Yeah. I think he would have loved it like everyone else did. My dad was, he was a pretty, I always think of him as having a pretty corny sense of humor. I don't even mean that as the pun, although it's a pretty good one. But I think he would have enjoyed, and he did some crazy things. I grew up, my early life was in suburbia. My dad bought this farm in the middle of nowhere in Ohio and dragged my brother and sister and I and my mom to this 52-acre farm that, the house was so decrepit that the farmer threw it in for free, on the property that he bought. And we had a sort of a Green Acres kind of life. These kind of, polished little suburban kids were suddenly thrust into feeding horses, and we didn't have an indoor bathroom. I had an outhouse when we moved there. So for a year I had to, brave Iowa or Ohio winters and through the snow to, go to the outhouse and any time of day or night. So it was not a romantic, great life. And I suppose in his own way, my dad was the Ray Kinsella hearing a voice that was to drag him out into the nowhere with his kids. And as much as I hated it when I was that age, I really look back fondly and realized that my dad, I think, was trying to make up for the father he hadn't had by spending as much time with his kids and literally separating us from the rest of the world in this kind of remote location.
I was reading the excerpt from your book. I think it was the first day in that house, and you and your sister are bailing water out of the flooded basement.
Yeah. Yeah, my dad had this, there was like a 4-foot crawl space, just dirt sided underneath this house. My dad was obsessed with digging basements. So we'd done one at my grandfather's country house a few years before. Anyway, he was obsessed with us digging this basement out, which we did by hand, with a pick and shovel, loading it into our little tiny tractor cart and driving it up out of the ramp. And we did that probably for 8 or 10 years of our first years there. If we had any spare time, we would, go down to the basement and, pick away at the dirt and anyway, because of the lay of the land there, the water just came through the water table and it would fill up. So yeah, the first winter we were there on my birthday, I was in a bucket brigade scooping water, muddy, disgusting water out of the basement of our house and throwing it out in our yard. So that was a harbinger of my life for years to come.
Well, you got through it pretty well. Let's take a look at some of the still images. One of the things I love about looking at movies from years ago are some of the stills, black and white, color. Some of them are used by the studios for promotional purposes. Sometimes you see photographs of scenes that didn't even appear in the movie. They didn't make the final cut, or they might have taken a picture when the camera was not running. But here we see some images of you with Kevin Costner, with Amy Madigan, and also the young actress Gabby Hoffman, who played Kevin's daughter in the film. Let's talk a little bit about this scene. It's one scene, but it's a long scene. And there's a lot that goes on in it. How long did it take to get this in terms of a final print? Take several days, or was it all done in that one night?
Yeah, we actually shot it over 2 weeks. I'll explain that. But these great pictures, Melinda Sue Gordon was the still photographer, and she was really fun lady. But yeah, that I was hired to work on the movie for 3 days originally, because it's 6 pages of script, and I was going to fly in one day, shoot the thing, and be off the next day. And by the time they got there, they were way behind schedule, mainly because the corn didn't grow. In 1988, when we shot it, it was there was a drought. It was the worst since the Dust Bowl. And so when I arrived on set, the corn was like this tall, and everybody was panicked about it. The farmers, when they have a dry year, they just wait. The rain usually comes later in the fall, and it just pushes everything back. But in this case, they have to shoot a movie with corn. That's not a phenomenon that they were used to in Iowa. And it would have looked absurd if these players were walking out of corn this tall. That's scraping their ankles as they came out. It would have been ridiculous. They had taken out an insurance policy with Lloyd's of London on the corn for millions of dollars, because it was essentially like a character in the film that they couldn't do without. But they also had ordered 30,000 stalks of fake silk corn stalks from Hong Kong that they were ready to have flown in if they had to kind of, place these art department to make it look like there were corn growing there. And they had to get special permission to water the corn, because, in Iowa, they just wait for the rain. But anyway, they put these rainbird sprinklers out, and in that intense heat that we were all dealing with, it grew, quickly. And so that was amazing. But because they were behind schedule, Phil decided to shoot our scene, this pivotal scene, at what's called magic hour, which is 15 minutes after sunset, that there's that kind of golden light in the sky, and it's very beautiful. But what that means is, because there's only 15 minutes of that light, even a 5-minute scene is going to take days and days and days. So basically, they would be shooting other parts of the movie, and when it got close to sunset, they would say, okay, everybody out to the field, and the crew would come out and they'd set up the dolly track, or reflector boards, or figure out where the shot was going to be. And and they would start working on it, and then they would wait and wait and wait till just after the sun went down and the light was just perfect. John Lindley, who was the DP, would say, "Okay, rolling," and I would say, "Is this heaven?" They'd say, "Great, let's do it again." "Is this heaven?" "Okay, that's about all we have time for." And then they'd wrap and go shoot somewhere else or be done for the day. And then the next day we'd come back and again around sunset, everybody'd run out there and they'd turn the camera on Kevin and he'd say, "No, it's Iowa. No, it's Iowa." And so we ended up shooting that whole scene almost a line at a time over a 2-week period. And it's weird to look at it now and realize that that's the case, because obviously they cut it together seamlessly. But as an actor, it was kind of difficult to get in that sweet, tenuous little emotional place that Kevin and I got into, to make the scene work. But we had to do that every day, for like a half an hour and then pop back out. And, it was challenging in that way for us. And for the DP and everybody else, they had to make sure the light was matching. And I remember a few days there were a bunch of clouds in the sky, so we couldn't shoot that day because it wouldn't match if we, shoot Kevin and there's no clouds and they shoot me and there is clouds. So, but it was a weird thing and not an experience that I'd had on any other films before then or since, for that matter.
Yeah, very fragmented. I think it would be frustrating for an actor. If I were an actor, I'd be like, "Hey, let us just do the whole scene. We'll run through it. If you don't like it, we'll do it again." But that apparently never happened.
Yeah, I mean, of course, we ran the scene in rehearsal, throughout, and usually what you do on a set is, if we're kind of by the end of the scene, you sort of, before their cameras roll, you sort of do all the other lines to kind of get the thing, and then they'll start the camera partway through or whatever. But it was definitely a challenge, and I'm, frankly, very pleasantly surprised that it came out so well. It is a difficult thing to kind of stop and start like that, but that's sort of what film acting is about, really.
I have to ask you about that flannel uniform. I assume it's flannel. It looks like flannel in the shots here. Was it real heavy and uncomfortable? I assume it was fairly warm that day or those days.
Oh yeah. I mean, fortunately I was shooting after sunset, but they'd have me in costume for a few hours ahead of time. And it was easily in the 90s every day. And yeah, it was, of course, I mean, the art department did such a crazy good job, and the wardrobe department. So those were real heavy wool, they were very realistic jerseys, and some of us were quite warm. It was just one of those things. We were shooting this great movie, and who wants to complain? But there were some guys from New York and from Chicago and from LA on that shoot that were just bored silly. It really is as remote as it looks, and it was more so then. I mean, the farm itself is on a dirt road. I mean, they've paved part of it now, but it was really out there. I grew up in the middle of nowhere, and this was legit. And so the art department, they would busy their evenings making silk screen T-shirts that had Shoeless Joe. That's the movie was called Shoeless Joe when we shot it. And yeah. They had started a bowling team. We have bowling shirts that say Shoeless Joe Bowling Team on the back, and we all made up fake bowling names. I was Lou, and so we would go to the bowling alley and bowl until as late as we could, and then we go to the bars in Dubuque, which in the Iowa side closed at 2, and then if you just crossed the Mississippi River, which was right outside our hotel, you could go into Illinois, and the bars were open till 4 because that's East Dubuque, and because of Al Capone, the bars stayed open later there. So we had a lot of fun, bar hopping. There's dog tracks. Who knew in Dubuque, Iowa? So we would go bet on the greyhounds, and it was a lot of fun, and it was interesting that the Field of Dreams was Shoeless Joe was a baseball movie, and people hadn't made baseball movies for years. So that's part of the reason that it took 10 years for that movie to even get a green light from somebody. But fortunately, the year before, Kevin had just shot Bull Durham, but it hadn't come out. It came out while we were shooting the movie in Iowa. So it was really interesting to watch Kevin, who would go out with us at night to bars, and he would be recognized somewhat, but when that movie came out and the momentum for it started to grow, we could hardly go anywhere with him because it would be 10 minutes before he would be surrounded by giggling women, and we would have to move on to somewhere else in order to just sort of have some time to ourselves and unwind. But the other kind of strange thing about Kevin's career is while we were shooting Field of Dreams, he would go back to his motorhome and he was writing with Michael Blake, Dances with Wolves, which obviously came out years later and he won an Oscar for. But interesting time that we were between Bull Durham and Dances with Wolves. Anyway, it was a pretty neat thing to be in Iowa in this kind of remote place with this guy who was becoming a huge, international movie star, and along with Bert Lancaster, who was amazing, and James Earl and Tim Busfield and Amy Madigan, all those folks. It was a good time.
Actually, this leads perfectly into my next question. Kevin Costner's reputation, his stardom was just sort of beginning. He's becoming a celebrity. Was that intimidating at all for you, knowing that you're going to do this scene primarily with him? The wife and the daughter will come in later, but much of the scene is just you and Kevin. Was that difficult? Was that intimidating?
Yeah. I mean, it's a pretty solid cast. Bert Lancaster is an actor I admired as a kid growing up, and of course James Earl. It's very weird to know that you're working with Darth Vader, or it's overwhelming. And frequently as an actor, you can't be starstruck too much. It's considered a little tacky, and it's like a rookie coming up and playing next to Derek Jeter. You can't fawn over him the way you might as your inner child would want to do. So I'm trying to act cool, but and Kevin is a great guy, but everybody wanted to get to know Kevin, everybody around, and I would have too. But what I realized was that for my character, John Kinsella, I have this admiration for Kevin because Kevin was doing in his career what I had hoped to do, which was, write his own things, create his own production company, and, kind of curate his own career in a way. And so I really admired him. And he's supposed to play my son in this, that we've had this, terrible disagreement with. But I had this admiration for him. And what I realized is when we were on the set and everybody was trying to get around Kevin, I thought, I could do that, try to, muscle in next to him when we're having a beer or whatever. But I realized that my true feeling as a person for Kevin was very similar to what John Kinsella's feeling is about his son, Ray, who'd built this baseball field and allowed him to kind of live his dream. So I just thought, if Kevin wants to get to know me, and, we talked quite a bit on the set, there's photos up there right now, you stand there waiting for the camera to be ready for, 20 minutes. And, of course we were talking and joking and he was always very nice, but I thought that my kind of tenuous admiration of him was worth hanging on to shoot the scene, and that it would sort of enhance the acting work that we were doing. And so I purposely didn't make an effort to kind of try to elbow my way into his inner circle. I mean, certainly after the movie came out, Kevin is always been very generous, signing things for me if I'm giving him to a charity. And every time you see him, I mean, he's got that great quality of charismatic people that you feel like you're the only person in their whole lives when they're looking in your eyes and talking with you. So he's been a good friend over the years, but at the time I opted not to, make a big deal the way everybody else was, because, his career was taking off in a phenomenal way.
I have heard that he is absolutely maniacal as a baseball fan. Is that true?
Yeah. I mean, at the time we were out in the middle of nowhere, like I said, but he's a good baseball player. I mean, between takes, we would frequently, have little pickup games or whatever. And Kevin could, just toss the ball up and, drive it into the corn easily, just regularly. I mean, I'd never been a super big hitter like that. And he clearly is a good baseball player. Yeah. So, and obviously you can tell by the movies he makes, he's a sports fan.
Interesting, the choice. They had you as the catcher. How'd you feel about that?
Yeah, I mean, I played baseball as a kid. I never played catcher. You know, to me, just being in the movie, you know, I remember when I was auditioning for it, I was like, oh man, I want to have a bigger part. I was trying to think like if I do a good enough audition, maybe they'll push me into a bigger part. I don't even know what bigger part there was in there, but you know, part of my, you know, that's just an actor insecurity thing. But what's interesting about it is I was basing that on the novella Shoeless Joe that the movie's based on. And one of the things that Phil Robinson, the director and writer of the script, did that, you know, has sort of made my career was that in the book, John Kinsella appears pretty early on, maybe even the first chapter or second chapter. He appears and he and Ray sort of have a continuing conversation as the book goes on, which is great, but it certainly takes the moment out of it. I didn't even get, when I read the script and we shot the movie, I didn't realize how important my character's role was in it. And I kind of embarrassed about that now, but I just sort of thought it was tying up the last loose end of the movie, and it was a beautiful scene and I was happy to do it. But once you added James Horner's, that beautiful score to the movie that sort of, I think, just beautifully builds momentum from the rumbling of the beginning instrumentals of the score to the, you know, rising orchestra of the end. I think it added a lot of momentum to the movie, and you know, they cut it beautifully. And I don't know, when we saw the cast and crew screening of the movie a couple of days before it was really released, I mean, I think I was along with everybody else just blown away. We were all in tears, and you know, we had shot the movie, we were in the movie, so we knew that it was something bigger than us. You know, usually you have a certain amount of judgment when you're watching your own work, and you know, it's never good enough. But that story really overwhelmed us, and you know, and clearly audience members ever since. But it was surprising to me that the movie had that kind of power, because I really, as much as it was an emotional read, it wasn't that profound. And I, you know, I'm, like I said, a little embarrassed that I didn't sort of anticipate that kind of power in the movie. But that's where I think the movie has its own energy, and I just, you know, I'm grateful to be in its aura.
And then that final image as you two are throwing the ball to each other, the headlights, that endless stream of cars on that winding road. I mean, it's just terrific.
Yeah, and what's strange about that, you look at it now and you think, oh, that's nothing. With CGI, you could have probably made that line of cars in 10 minutes, but they didn't have that back then. That's actually 3,000 local farmers and 1,500 cars that were stretched on the 3 miles between the field and Dyersville, Iowa. And it's remarkable. They were all in their cars listening to the director on the AM radio. They had agreed with a local AM radio station that Phil would come in, and so he could communicate with all 3 miles of cars at once. I thought it very clever. And there were highway patrol people out there. There were mechanics. AAA was out there to make sure if cars overheated, because, you know, what a disaster that would have been. They were serving popcorn and peanuts to the cars running around. And then, you know, when it was time for a take, all those people would jump into the ditches so you couldn't see them in an overhead shot. There's 4 or 5 other baseball fields in the Dyersville area that blacked out for that night in deference to the movie. The railroad that goes through there changed their schedule. There was a blackout in the town. I mean, it was a huge production. And of course, it's a helicopter shot, which was, you know, by far the most expensive shot in the movie. And you know, it took forever. We thought we'd get one take because, again, it had to be light enough to match the scene where Kevin and I had started playing catch, but it had to be dark enough that you could see the line of cars in the background. So it was very touchy about timing, and we thought we have one take. And so anyway, the whole the helicopter takes off, and you know, the rush, the rotor wash, and all I could think about, all this stuff, there's a guy hanging out of the helicopter with a camera, and I'm thinking, what if I drop the ball? What if Kevin throws it, it falls down? I thought, oh, how embarrassing. I look like such an idiot. So, you know, you're not nervous when you play catch. I played catch with my brother a billion times when we were growing up. But suddenly when you're thinking like, oh, how stupid it would be if, oh, here's my dad, great baseball player, and I dropped the ball. Anyway, it's just funny how insecure as an actor you can get, even in the course of this magical scene that, anyway, to finish that story, we ended up getting 2 more takes at it. Believe it or not, they shot the first one and didn't quite look right. They shot it again. They weren't sure back then. They didn't have a video feed, so you didn't know if you got it or didn't get it, you know. Anyway, we took a third take, and Phil at the last minute says through to the AM radio to all the cars in the line, flash your lights. Just pull them on and off. When I say rolling, flash your lights as you're, and what was interesting, because the cars were moving so slowly, in the other takes, it didn't seem like they were moving. But what happened when they flashed their lights was it looks like they're passing, trees or bushes or something. And anyway, that's the scene they ended up using. And on top of that, the first 2 takes, when the camera pans up from the field to the headlights in the distance, the assistant camera operator had to open the iris of the camera in order for it to be able to take in the light and see those things. Well, when they got the film back to LA, and we had wrapped, the whole set was over, everything was done. They watched the first take, and when that pans up, it goes to black. And they're like, oh my gosh, well, let's look at the second take. Second take comes up, goes to black. And they're like, oh my gosh, we didn't get this pivotal moment. This is the most expensive. We can't go back. They tried the third take, and sure enough, it comes up. They see the lights flickering, and it's the one they ended up using. And they figured out later that the camera assistant, in all the confusion and craziness, had closed the iris instead of opened it, so that it went to black because there was no light getting into the camera. In any case, it's just one of those miracle things about this movie, Field of Dreams, that and serendipitous, I guess you could call it, that ended up happening, that made that scene so powerful, but could have been a disaster, like the corn itself not growing. But to tag that scene, so I said they watered the corn. So finally, the corn's tall enough, they decided to shoot outside. Well, it had grown to 8 feet tall. So Kevin's supposed to be walking through the rows of corn, and they're supposed to be filming him. They can't even see him. So they actually had to build a ramp, a little platform between the rows of corn, so that Kevin could walk through it and study the ears of, the leaves of the corn to see if it, for the early parts of the movie where he's, before he builds the field. And so it was just another one of those things. And then, of course, as soon as they got the corn high enough, they plowed it under and put in a baseball diamond and rolled out sod, which in that heat died in 3 days. So it was just a comedy of errors shooting that movie. And the fact that it comes out looking so beautiful is really a testament to the art department, the editing department, and all the people involved, producer Brian Frankish and Phil Robinson.
Well, it all came together fantastically. You mentioned earlier about Bert Lancaster. You had a schedule that overlapped a little bit. You were on the set with him a couple of days, and you did mention to me earlier that you had a chance to talk to him briefly.
Yeah, like I said, he was a hero to me, and I was determined to just say hello and express my gratitude for all the movies that he made and that I watched as a kid. But Bert was not in great health. This ended up being his last American movie. He had another thing he was going off to shoot in Italy, I think, so he had to finish at a certain time. Everybody said, don't go talk to Bert. He's not in a good mood. I think there was a lot of reasons for that. I mean, other than, he was old. He would insisted on coming and sitting in the hot sun in his wool overcoat, while he was waiting, and everybody'd say, why don't you go inside for a while? No, I want to get he was trying to get Phil to move faster as a director. Bert had directed things himself. So he was impatient, for one thing. And I think also because he was such an amazing athlete. I mean, he was a scholarship basketball player, I think, and it became an acrobat. And I think it was difficult for him to watch all the other younger people playing baseball and all that when he knew he couldn't do it. But for whatever reasons, he was not an easy presence on the set for the most part. I decided I had to talk to him. This is the last day he was leaving as soon as he finished shooting this day. And I went over to him in my baseball uniform because I was going to shoot later that day. And I said, excuse me, Mr. Lancaster, I just wanted to say, I played John Kinsella in the movie, and I just want to say I'm a big fan and all this. He said, Kinsella, good to meet you. And anyway, he was just very gracious. And we talked about Kinsella and how that's an Irish name, and Moonlight Graham. It's Graham. It's 2 syllables. And anyway, it was just super charming. And then a second later, he had to go off and shoot his scene. But I actually got to shake his hand and thank him for his contribution. And I think I would really regret that if I hadn't made the effort. And I was lucky enough to catch him in a good space.
Very nice. I want to talk about this man. I had a chance to meet James Earl Jones. He came to the Hall of Fame for a program back in 2004, and that would have been the 15th anniversary of the film. The program was actually hosted by a film critic, and for some reason his name is escaping me, Jeffrey Lyons, longtime film critic who's been on television. He actually did the program at our Grandstand Theater. But before the live program, I got to do a short interview with Mr. Jones for the Hall of Fame archive. He could not have been nicer. He was so gracious, such a gentleman. I was nervous about going in because I admired him so much. And you often hear about, well, you meet your idols and you meet people that you like as actors, and sometimes it's disappointing. Not at all the case with James Earl Jones. How did it go for you and him?
Oh, I agree with you. He's one of the nicest people I've met in show business. And I, like you, was very nervous to meet him. And I was practicing, hi, Mr. Earl Jones. And I was like, hold it, is his name Earl Jones? Is it hyphenated? I was just like, but I was practicing this. I don't do that. Like I said, you're supposed to act cool on the set. And we'd been kind of, when I first arrived at the set, I was taking a lot of those early photos that accompany the monologue at the beginning of the movie. So I was kind of separate from the actual shooting crew. So at the end of one of those days, I ended up in the makeup trailer. I tell this story in the book as well, but I'm sitting there and just, I'm tired for long days of work. And suddenly I realize it's James Earl sitting next, he's like one chair away from me. And in a makeup trailer, it's all mirrors. So, obviously it's not like I can't see him, but I was so stymied on pretending that I can't see him until I can figure out how to introduce myself or whatever. And I'm just fretting and sweating. And all of a sudden I hear, hi, I'm Jimmy. And his big hand comes over and shakes my hand. And, he knew, he must know from everybody he meets is in awe of him. And, he was kind enough to kind of let the air out of the room and just make it as easy as possible for me to just be a human being again. And, he grew up on a farm and I grew up on a farm, and we talked about a lot of things. And he's, he's just as nice and smart and thoughtful as you would imagine. He's just a very, very good human being. And I'm, honored to have known him and worked with him, although we, never had a scene together. It's just, one of those great remembrances of mine.
It's funny that he introduced himself as Jimmy. I would not have thought for a million years to call him that. It would have been James.
Yeah. He prefers to go by James Earl, but I think he knew that by saying Jimmy, it was as, I think he did it on purpose just to kind of make him feel, take as much of the icon status out of his presence as he could. Hey, I'm just Jimmy. Like, we're actors together. Let's talk about real things. Like, we talked about my scene, and he said, "Oh, it's a great role." I don't know. He was just very gracious. I thought, to even have used that. To call himself Jimmy just so I could kind of get over my nervousness was sweet.
A real veteran of baseball films too. Not only, of course, did he do The Field of Dreams, but The Sandlot, a terrific movie that came out in the early 90s. And then if you go back to the 70s, he was the first baseman in the Bingo Long Traveling All-Star. So he's got an interesting connection to baseball and film. We do have a few.
Also, he'd been in Fences on Broadway.
Oh, really?
Play and actually, Phil Robinson, the director, had seen his performance, which was spectacular, of course, and sort of wrote the role of Terrence Mann for him because of the performance he'd seen years earlier of Fences.
Interesting. We do have a few minutes left with Dwier Brown. If you have questions for Dwier, go to the Zoom group chat, type in the question, and we'll do our best to get those questions in before our time has elapsed. Again, the book is If You Build It, about fathers, fate, Field of Dreams with, well, now the longtime actor. I want to make Dwier feel old, but he's been doing this since the early 1980s. Field of Dreams now 31 years old. We have the book available, signed copies, so these have already been pre-signed by Dwier. And if you go to shop.baseballhall.org, again, that's shop.baseballhall.org, you can order your pre-signed copy of If You Build It by Dwier Brown. Dwier, in addition to continuing to promote the book, what's coming up for you next in terms of film and or TV roles?
Well, I've been, I mean, obviously nothing is going on right now because of COVID, but yeah, I have an agent out there pursuing things. I guess I always hoped that film would have higher aspirations. So I'm more choosy about things. I think Field of Dreams spoiled me in some ways. This is what I wanted my career to be like, that I would be in movies that change people's lives or change the way they look at their own lives. Like It's a Wonderful Life. It poses these kind of questions like what would the world be like if I hadn't been here? Or in Field of Dreams case, what if I met my father at my age and we didn't know, would we be friends? Would we get along? Or if I got a second chance to talk to my dad again, what would I say, to make things better or to let them know how much I loved them and all those kind of things. So if they made more movies like Field of Dreams, I'd be more interested in being in them. And hello to everybody out there. Thanks for tuning in.
Is there another film aside from Field of Dreams that you're particularly proud of, either because you thought you nailed the role or just the overall film was that good?
Gosh, there's a Western I did in, it must have been the 80s, called Desperado. It was a TV movie. I just liked the role and I liked how it came off. There's an episode of House MD that I really liked. I felt good about what I did, and to me, great acting can be cathartic and can help people. I think that was my driving force when I was younger. And so when I had those kind of roles where I feel like I really kind of nailed a certain emotional state or a certain situation or a certain kind of healing moment, those are the ones that stick out to me. But it's fun to look back at this point on all the things I did, because I was always worried about the jobs I didn't get, and there were plenty of those. I auditioned against Tom Cruise for Risky Business and obviously didn't get it. I auditioned against Brad Pitt for Thelma and Louise and didn't get it, but I was down to the last few people on these. And, I don't want to look back at it as sour grapes. This is the movie that I was in that people remember. And, even though it's only, 5-6 minutes of screen time, I wouldn't have it any other way. This is the movie that to me encapsulates what I became an actor to do. And so I'm very happy about it. And not to say that I could have been Tom Cruise or Brad Pitt, but when you're a young actor and they're just there with you, you think, okay, I'm going to beat that guy for this part. It's like sports or anything else. You get competitive, and, I lost a lot more jobs than I won, sadly. But looking back, it's kind of a long string, and I raised my family as an actor. That's pretty amazing from a kid who grew up on a farm in Ohio.
Yeah. I have to ask you about Red Dragon. I love the movie. I'm a big Anthony Hopkins fan. Was that an enjoyable experience?
Oh yeah. It was totally fun. We shot that in Baltimore, and I really loved the director, and we, it was kind of fun. It's one of those things. Frequently as a film actor, you never know how it's going to come off. And on top of that, in that movie, we shot a lot of it with a video camera, because it's a lot of it is home video that's in as a part of the movie. So anyway, that makes it that makes it kind of interesting because these professional cameramen are trying to do a mediocre job of being a cameraman because it's supposed to be home video, So anyway, all those things make it, kind of a fun aspect. Any job you get. I mean, there's very few jobs that I sort of it was like pulling teeth. You try to enjoy it. My dad taught me, if you're doing work you don't like, then, make a game out of it. I'm pretty good at that,
One of the credits I showed earlier was a TV show I really enjoyed. I thought it was very underrated, still underappreciated, and that is Ghost Whisperer. You had a guest starring appearance on that, and my understanding is that the gentleman who plays Jennifer Love Hewitt's husband in the show, I think it's David Conrad. I understand he's a big baseball fan. I'm trying to remember if you were in a scene with him. Did you meet him? What was that experience like?
Oh, like I said, I had a lot of fun. We shot that on the lot, and what's interesting to me is in the years since Field of Dreams came out, I will frequently be doing a guest spot on some TV show, and invariably I'm sitting in my chair or whatever, and one of the other actors, usually younger guys, come over and like, hey man, I just got to tell you that role in Field of Dreams, I mean, it's really nice to have done something that people can look back and associate you with in a positive way. And certainly doing guest stars on TV shows is not always easy because there's this camaraderie amongst the crew and the regular cast that see each other every day, and so they're very close. So sometimes when you come in to do a day or a two or a week or whatever, you're trying to elbow your way into a very tight group. And for me, I always feel like I do better work when I'm comfortable with the people I'm working in, because you're performing in front of this, 40 or 50 people that are behind the camera that you can't see. And if I think those guys like me or think that I'm a nice guy, it makes it easier for me to do my work. So it's really nice when somebody can come up to me, and it's happened many times. It really just kind of, again, just makes me feel comfortable, being there in somebody else's, in their home court. So, it's great. I loved working with Jennifer.
One final question. It's actually from one of our audience members, and I just want to make sure I'm getting his name right. It's Ken. Did you ever have a chance to meet the author of Shoeless Joe, W.P. Kinsella?
Yes, I did. In fact, I have a signed copy of his book. But Bill Kinsella is a genuine eccentric guy in the best possible way. I love people that are interesting. He had, he was very interested in most of his books deal with Native Americans or First Nation, I guess they call them in Canada, and baseball. And he went to the Iowa Writers Program as a 40-year-old trying to become a writer, and he just led a pretty fantastic life. Oddly, later in his life, he was hit by a car, which destroyed his ability to write because of the connections that it damaged in his brain, which is also just, incredibly tragic. But just kind of he was just a very interesting character, and he had to be talked into writing the book Shoeless Joe. He'd written it originally as a 25-page short story, and it managed to make it into an anthology in Canada. And a young writer, Lawrence Kessenich, found it. He had worked at Houghton Mifflin in Boston area, and convinced him to turn it into. Had to be almost twist his arm to write it into the novella that became the great movie that we're talking about. But it's another one of those incredible, circuitous, serendipitous journeys that Shoeless Joe went through to become Field of Dreams.
Well, Dwier, it's been a lot of fun being with you over this last hour. We really appreciate your time. We hope that you can come out to Cooperstown in the near future, and if so, I will have you, or I will ask you to personalize a signed copy for me.
I'll do it.
We hope you can come out in the near future. We'd love to have you again.
Well, thanks so much, Bruce, and this has been great. love the baseball hall, and I will be back for sure. So, and thanks again. Thank you all for tuning in, and see you again soon.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you, Dwier.
Bruce. Hey, Bruce.
Appreciate it. Yeah.
Want to have a catch?
Sure.
That's for you.
We'll do it virtually. Yes,
Okay,
absolutely. The book, again, is If You Build It. It's a book about fathers, fate, and Field of Dreams. It is available, pre-signed copies. They have been signed by Dwier at shop.baseballhall.org. Again, shop.baseballhall.org. And if you'd like to learn more about Dwier, check out his website, and that's dwierbrown.com. That's DWIER brown.com. We thank you for joining us. We thank Dwier for being with us for the virtual author series from Baseball Hall of Fame. Hope you enjoyed it, everyone. Have a great day.